Welcome. My name is Stephanie Lovegrove Hansen. I am the Senior Marketing Manager at Silverchair. We're glad to have you with us today for the Silverchair Universe Presents Cite. We have Josh Nicholson, co-founder and CEO of Cite, who will be taking us through an overview of the work they do and how it can help your business and your users. Before we get started, just a quick couple housekeeping things from our end. This is recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording afterwards. We'll send that out to you. We'll also have a brief survey afterwards. We'd love if you could take a moment to complete that just to help us improve the program and the webinar series. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to just type them into that Q&A box, and we will also have time for open Q&A at the end. We can have just a little more of an open discussion for anyone who would like to. And so with that, I will pass it over to you, Josh.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining. Let me make sure I can share the right things. Can you guys hear me all right and see my screen?
I can.
Okay, they're all muted, so they can't answer. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting time to be kind of talking about science. I think, you know, what we do at Cite and the utility of it has maybe become clearer in these times, which is a bit weird. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on COVID stuff today and show some examples. Before that, I'd like to kind of just give, you know, a very general background as to why Cite exists, what we're trying to accomplish, how the idea came about, and then to walk you through various different examples of research. And so I like to set the stage by reminding everyone, especially scientific publishers, because I think they can forget this, that what they do is, you know, pretty amazing, right? So, you know, it's very important to do the work at the bench and to be a scientist, but to communicate that work out and publish it, I would say is equally as important. And science has given us, you know, the internet, life-saving vaccines, hopefully some more of those coming soon, space telescopes, pasteurization, all these amazing different breakthroughs that we have going from cancer research to psychology to policy comes from research. And with that said, it's also imperfect. So there's been, you know, various studies looking at different fields like cancer research, psychology, even machine learning, where if you take scientific research and try to validate it or repeat it, more often than not, you can't. And so this is where the idea behind Cite initially came from, is how can we identify, incentivize, discover what is reliable so that we can build upon it, cite it, and what is not. And I think beyond just, you know, looking at kind of reliability in science is a larger issue of that there is a massive amount of information being published, you know, each day now. How do we sift through that? And I think, you know, with Cite, this has become, you know, not just an evaluation platform, but a discovery platform as well. And so our aim is really to make, you know, not necessarily science faster per se, but to make it more reliable. And I think really to kind of, you know, incentivize and reward and change some behaviors for researchers to chase that as opposed to impact as a measure. So this is the homepage of Cite, and I'm going to switch now to actually showing you, you know, what Cite does. And so the way that I like to show Cite is to show the world as it exists today without Cite. And so this is my PhD work. There I am. It was published in eLife. I did my PhD at Virginia Tech. It was a collaboration with the hospital in Portugal, as well as a lab at the NIH. It's been cited 41 times and then viewed roughly 5,500 times. And so this is what we all look at as researchers, administrators, policymakers, the public, when we first see a scientific article. Where was it published? Who are the authors? What are their affiliations? And then some metrics. How many times has it been cited? How many times has it been downloaded, viewed? And then increasingly across different platforms, alt metrics. So how many times has it been shared on Facebook, Twitter, things like this. And so what we want to do is really transform this part of the publication into something that is not just a number, but something that is actually, you know, I'd say much more useful. And so if you look at this article, you can go read what do 41 different articles say about my work. But this is a massive amount of work. And I would argue that most people are not doing that. You know, every article that they read, they're not going through the citations and reading all of these. However, you know, by definition, these articles are directly related to my work. They're citing it. Some of those might have tested it, and of those that have tested it, some might support it or some might contradict it. And so that valuable information is out there. It's just not very digestible in today's format. And so that is effectively what we're trying to change at Cite, is so that you can see, not just how many times something has been cited, but how has it been cited. And so we have a plugin which is available for Chrome or Firefox that will basically take our citation information and allow you to view it anywhere you're reading a scientific article online. So we don't actually have an agreement with eLife. This is through the browser. So if you click this, it will bring you over to Cite, and this is a Cite report. And you can see that we have basically the same metadata. So where was it published? Who are the authors, the title, and then the abstract. And then what is entirely novel about this is that we are not just showing citations by showing the metadata, i.e. the title, the journal, and the year. What we're doing is showing the context or excerpts from the full text of these citations. And so if you look at this first citation, we classify it as mentioning. You can see the title. This is a DOI, so everything links to the version of record. These are the authors. It was published in Scientific Reports, and it comes from the discussion section of this paper. So this, these couple sentences come from the discussion section of this Science Reports paper. And so if you read it, you can see why it's classified as mentioning. So such an effect may be the increased rate of chromosome missegregation recently reported for DLD1 plus 7, DLD1 plus 13, and AF plus 13 cells compared to diploid DLD1 and AF cells. So they're just mentioning my work. They're not saying that they support it or that they contradict it or that they're challenging it with evidence. They're just mentioning it. And this is really kind of our default bucket. If you click off mentioning to select for the supporting citation, you can see why there's a difference. So again, highlighting, you can see the authors, the journal, and then where in the section that this excerpt comes from. And if you skip the first sentence and read the second sentence, you can see why it's classified as such. So it'll say, in agreement with previous work, and then there's a citation to me, the trisomic clone shows similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent, supplemental figure S2B. So in a matter of a minute and a few clicks, we were able to go from, okay, here's this article that's published in eLife, it's been moderately cited, to being able to say that it's been independently supported by another group. And I think that, to me is a massive amount of information and really kind of enrichment that everyone can make decisions more effectively. So if you're going to cite my work, if you want to repeat my work, if you want to build upon it, or on the other side, if you want to fund this work, say you're at a NIH peer review panel, or you're an administrator trying to decide tenure promotion, I think this information just takes citations one step further. And so the one thing that I think we should emphasize is that it's not just about supporting and contradicting citations, but being able to see the context allows you to evaluate and assess how are people citing this. And so you can quickly scan through these different 35 citation statements and say, what are they saying about Josh's work? Are some looking at this in yeast, or some looking at this in mice, so on and so forth. And so we have all these different filters beyond classification that lets you sort by the year published, citations that appear, say, only in the methods section. If you're a researcher that want to see how 10 different papers did the same methods, that will help. You can organize by paper type, which is a research article and review currently, and we'll likely add preprint there as well soon, although we are already doing preprints. And then in the case where there's cite reports that have, say, hundreds or thousands of citations, this becomes more. We allow you to search these different contexts. And so you can search for yeast in this instance, and it will search this text as well as the title and the metadata as well to limit this down. And I think that is effectively kind of like your brain becomes the classifier. So don't necessarily just rely upon us dividing into these 3 different buckets, but you can choose how to search it. And so in order to do this, we need access to full text articles. And so we get access to full text articles from a variety of different sources. These come from open sources like the government, open access publishers, and then increasingly we've started to sign indexing agreements with various publishers, which include Karger, BMJ, Future Science Group, Rockefeller University Press, and then as of very recently, Wiley. And so with this access to the full text from publishers, we parse out the citations, and I can show you generally what this looks like. We parsed out citations so that it looks like this. There's a massive amount of machine learning that just goes into this. So we work with either XML provided by the publishers, which is generally easy, although can indeed come with some complications, or PDFs, which we found most publications to be in anyways pre certain dates like 2000. And so we utilize 11 different machine learning models with 20 to 30 different features each on each of these models to extract this information out of PDFs. And this is just a visual representation of what that looks like. And so in certain cases, we do very well, generally on newer PDFs and where citations are easily matched. However, it becomes more challenging when you're talking about subscript, superscript, parentheticals, two-column PDFs, etc. Once we extract and match the references to what it is, we then classify the text, which is generally 3 sentences around the citation, using a deep learning model. That deep learning model has been trained, actually this is a larger number now, on 45,000 manually annotated citation snippets. So the way that we do that is take out these little excerpts, and then we as experts read these and have 2 different people at least read them and say, okay, the authors of this are supporting this with evidence, they're contradicting it with evidence, or they're just mentioning it. Those 45,000 different citation statements are fed into this deep learning model and trained it, which is tested against a holdout set of roughly 75 different hundred excerpts, which again are manually annotated. So that is how we're doing this at scale, is that we're automating this to some extent. And I think it would really be kind of impossible without this. And so to date, we have done just over 15 million full text publications. That's amounted to about 495 million of these citation snippets. And we're adding more each day as we process these from various indexing agreements. While this is pretty impressive, and we aim to have perfect coverage, to have it fresh, and to have it perfectly accurate, the reality is that it's extremely difficult to do this. And so it's not always going to be that we get it right. And so next to each citation, we have flags, and we allow users that are signed in to flag sites that they believe to be misclassified. And so if you click this flag, you can say that this site should be classified as supporting, contradicting, or mentioning, and then you can provide rationale for why that is. We then review that on the back end and basically immediately either accept it or reject it. And what we utilize to accept or reject is really, can we see from the publication, which is already published, something clear that demonstrates that they support or contradict this? Not does this overall feel supportive or contradicting like this. And we've actually already started to see people try to change certain citations to supporting when it's just clearly not. So this is where we are today. You can search basically any article that has a DOI, and in most cases we will have citation information, although not all. So we're still working to ingest millions of publications and consequently get millions of these. Where we're going with this is the ability to look at people. And so I can show you my own profile, to look at people, to look at journals, to look at institutions, really anywhere that scientific articles and citations have an impact today. We think our tool will provide this new utility and kind of a step forward. And so this is just a rough look at, here's all the different things that I've published, and then here's the citation. So very similar to some other platforms. Was this the first, were we the ones that first came up with this idea? So we thought we were. So we came up with this without knowing that, other people have discussed this, or that it has actually been implemented in other verticals or other industries. And so this paper, I think, is really fascinating, and I like to share it because it puts into context how long have people been thinking about adding classifications or markers, as Eugene Garfield says, to citations? And so this paper is from 1964. It was published by Eugene Garfield, and I think it's based on one of his talks. And what he's writing in this paper is the introduction of markers alongside citation indices. And so what he calls markers are what we would call classifications. And so in the case of above, he says the paragraph, for example, would have a critique, or one of several other terse statements like Mr. X is wrong, data spurious, conclusions wrong, or then my favorite kind of classification, calamity for mankind. And so we are effectively taking what he outlined back in 1964 and making it, a reality. And so he had this idea early on, largely owing to the fact that the approach that we take has existed in law for over 100 years. So lawyers, when they are citing, court cases, they need to know if that law is still good law or if it's been overturned. And so there is a service called Keycite and Shepardizing, so it's named after this guy, Frank Shepard, that allows lawyers to look at publications much in the same way that you would look at a scientific publication under cite to say, is this something that I want to cite, or is this something I should not cite because it is no longer good law? So we are effectively, bringing Shepardizing and this functionality, which has existed in law for over 100 years, to science. And we're able to do that now because of the advances in technology, specifically in deep learning, which is necessary to deal with just the vast amount of content and how it's referenced. And so these numbers are a bit out of date. These are some outcomes that researchers, have shared with us. Really, finding it useful from looking across different disciplines. And I think that is the most utility, is when you are looking at something that you are not intimately aware with, looking at every day. This just gives you a massive amount of information that you can digest in an easy way. We started to work with publishers to provide them data. And anyone on the call, please email me after this, and I can provide you, high-level information on your different journals that you guys can discuss internally. So which journals are receiving more supporting citations or more contradicting citations, likewise, which is the most supported paper, things like this. We're happy to provide that to facilitate discussions. And then really, I'd kind of like to, at this point, give a high-level view of what that looks like, not at a journal relation, but really kind of at the global level. So at a journal level, not at the publisher level, but at the journal level, at a global level. And so what we've done and started to look at now is not just these citations at the article level, but at journals. And so we've taken, 2,445 journals where Cite has at least 500 cites that either support or contradict. So there's enough testing citations, and then have said, okay, how does this look for different journals in one field, across different fields? How many have these citations, et cetera? And so 35% of articles have at least one supporting or contradicting citation. And these are the amount of articles. And again, these numbers are a little bit out of date now since we've continually added articles. We've introduced, or are starting to introduce, what we call the Cite Journal Index. And this is to really add some balance to, I'd say, all these other metrics that are looking at impact. We now want to start to say, okay, that's great to look at the quantity, but we also now want to look at the quality of things. And so the Cite Journal Index is really looking at just the number of supporting citations over the total number of testing. So everything is 0 to 1. If you had all supporting citations, it would be 1. If you had half supporting and half contradicting, you'd have a Cite Journal Index of 0.5. And so we've now started to plot this against the impact factor to see if there's a relationship there, and we didn't see any strong relationship. We've plotted this across different disciplines. And so if you look at Cite Journal Index scores from math versus, say, clinical research, you can see that there's generally more supporting citations in math, which is maybe not entirely surprising, versus clinical research or social and behavioral sciences, where I think there's a lot more debate. And so not necessarily that there's worse research, but there's a lot more debate. And I think this debate is actually a good thing. You can start to look at this information over time. And so we've picked basically a handful of random journals to say, okay, how does the Cite Journal Index change over time? And I think this information, along with actually having the information that we can provide to publishers, can help them look at their editorial internally. Are there things that we did differently, and why are we receiving more citations now? And I think beyond just looking at the editorial, we can also, provide publishers a way for them to not necessarily market impact, but reliability. And so they can say, hey, maybe we don't have the highest impact factor journal, or maybe we do, but we also, care about publishing reliable stuff. And here's a way that we can actually demonstrate that beyond just, say, signing on to some guidelines or something like this. And so this is, maybe where I'd like to kind of stop and make it more of a discussion and answer any questions. Actually, I guess before doing that, maybe it's useful to show a few different examples in the wild. So beyond indexing, we've now started to work directly with publishers to display this citation information. And so Biotechniques was our first integration. You can see this article is looking at CRISPR, which used to be the hot topic of science, but is now taken a back seat. We are now alongside, in their metrics section, alongside altmetrics and dimensions. And if you click that, again, it brings you over to Cite, and it'll show you in a matter of clicks that this has been independently, or this has been supported by other groups, which again, I think is very powerful. We've integrated with Europe PMC. So any article where we have citation information, our information will appear there. And so if you go to the citation and impact section of my article, you can see here's their citations, which is 15. Here's the altmetric widget, and then there's our information, which we call Smart Citations down at the bottom. And then as of very recently, we've just actually downloaded, sorry, this thing's getting in the way. We've just actually downloaded virtually all articles on coronavirus and specifically on COVID-19 in an effort to help the world really better understand the content that is being rapidly published. And so this is a preprint from bioRxiv, which was posted on February 13. And we actually already have citation information for that. So again, this is the plugin highlighting this. If you click this, it'll bring you back over to Cite, and you can see that there's 10 different citation statements, and then one of these support. And this says our estimates of 0 are broadly consistent with earlier estimates from other groups. And I think that is just something that is massively important, not only to look at like, okay, is this reproducible, but really just to help you navigate through this massive amount of content that is being produced each day, and will continue to be produced even more so as we go on. And so that has mostly been a utility to readers, authors, editors, and publishers. Other places that we're starting to explore is at the draft stage. And so we've heard a lot of questions from editors and publishers. Okay, this is great, but I have a lot of my challenges are in submissions and handling these. So is there a way that Cite can help? And so obviously a manuscript doesn't have citations to it, so we won't have the ability to say that this has been supported or tested independently because it has not yet even been published. However, all manuscripts or all manuscripts presenting new data do have references, and those references generally have many citations to them. And so we've partnered with Scholarcy as well as Unsilo to provide a check on references at the manuscript stage. And so this is what it looks like with Scholarcy. They provide all these different checks for preprints or for publications. And if you scroll down to the references, you can start to see, okay, this manuscript is citing all these different references. This reference has been cited 4 times. This one's been cited 15 times. This one has been cited 72, and one of them support. And then here's one that has a contradiction. And I introduced this to everyone, not to say that like this reference has a contradiction, it should be removed, but to provide this context to the authors, to the peer reviewers, and to the editors so that they can better understand these references. I also think this could be a potential for, sourcing, peer reviewers. So I've also heard that the editors look at the reference list very often to find good reviewers of the content. You could take this one step further by clicking these different, citations and then looking at those authors as potential people to invite for reviewers. And so with that, I will stop and happily take questions and make it more of a discussion. So let me unmute.
Thank you, Josh. That's amazing. Yeah, please, everyone, go ahead and type questions into the Q&A as they come up. I can kind of get us started. I know that I have seen a lot of mentions on Twitter and stuff. Users are really excited about the tool, and I keep seeing things pop up. About how many users would you estimate you have as far as like researchers?
Yeah, so Cite has been fully open and is still largely open to everyone. So there's no reason to sign up because you could get everything fully open. we've now restricted what we show to non-signed up users as of earlier this week, actually, so that you can only see the first 10 citations, the first 10 random citations. If you want to see the rest, we simply ask you to sign in. And so we have, about 3,000 visits per day. Most of those people are not actually users though, because there has not been a reason to sign up. And so that, hopefully kind of answers your questions and gives a little bit more context on the users and use case.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know you mentioned the profiles as being sort of what's coming next. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually think that was a little bit of us getting ahead of ourselves. And so, the core focus of Cite is coverage. So we need access to content, otherwise we can't analyze it. We need that content to be as fresh as possible, otherwise there'll be this big delay in things unnecessarily. And then we need it to be as accurate as possible. So is what we say supporting or contradicting actually that? And so that in itself is very complex, and we should stay focused on that. And so we introduced, I would say, profiles a bit early because we had metadata that was out of date, which should never happen and should really come before adding new functionality and kind of features. And so we have kind of pushed that a little bit to the side and gone back towards ingesting content and really setting up this pipeline that's fully automated so that as we get content from publishers, it is automatically added, processed to the database. And so that once we have all these different indexing agreements and open sources coming in, it's just this pipeline that's taking this content, analyzing it, adding to the database, and it's really happening kind of at the speed of publishing without too much manual intervention. And we don't obviously have the luxury of having too much manual intervention because we're a small team. And then one other thing which I think is worth mentioning, which you didn't ask, but I think is something that users can get confused about, is what do we mean by supporting, contradicting, and mentioning? And so a lot of people, when they come to Cite, they first will go to their own work. Then they'll go to work that they think is bad or work that has been retracted. And so very often they go to this Wakefield paper, which has been retracted and was published in the Lancet. And oftentimes they're surprised because we don't have hundreds of contradicting citations. And the reason for that is that we're classifying these citations as supporting or contradicting based on evidence, not just do they provide positive or negative sentiment. So if there are a lot of people saying things that are critical or negative or maybe even mean about that article, and maybe rightfully so, but we will not classify that as contradicting because we're looking for, does this citation and this paper bring new analyses and new data to support or contradict the claim? And I think that's important to emphasize and set forward. And that shows, maybe why most of our citations are mentioning and then, supporting and contradicting. See, we also have, so I see a question. So maybe answer live. So the question is, I don't know if you guys can see it, so I'll just read it. This is highly detailed for journal articles. Have you given any thought on proceedings papers and ebooks? So we effectively want to analyze anything that makes a testable claim. That makes a testable claim. Sorry, let me unmute. Okay. So we would like to basically analyze anything that is either making a testable claim or looking at a testable claim. Currently, we are looking at anything that has a DOI, so that is our limitation, and I think that's just because again, this is easier to do than taking into account other identifiers, and it's pretty robust for most cases. And so with that said, yes, it is mostly articles. However, there are chapters, there's even books with DOIs where we have analyzed that. And so we do want to analyze content that is not just the typical journal article, including even preprints. We want to make it clear though to users which is which and to filter out these, because a preprint saying that it supports something may actually have that evidence, but it has not undergone peer review. And so we think this differentiation should be apparent to the user. And I think that is really kind of what we're trying to add and focus on is making all these different things, like self-citations would be another great one, which we're working on, so that people can just generally better understand how has this research or content in whatever format been received. Okay, cool. Another question. So I'll read this one aloud, although I think you guys can probably see it as well. Very interesting tool. Like most designers of metrics, you have a good sense of the limitations of your metric and how responsible use it requires responsible use of it requires thoughtfulness. But it is well established that the more a metric is taken up, the less thoughtful the uses. What are your irresponsible uses of this metric, do you imagine, and how do you mitigate these uses? So I think this is right. I think, anytime you try to distill something very complex into something like a single number or a metric, you lose information, and it can start to obfuscate the actual use of this. And so we're no different from that. And so I don't want to say that we're better than impact factor because we're doing X, Y, and Z. I think we are an improvement in some cases on this, but we're also a limitation in many others. And so if you look at Cite, the whole aim of Cite has not just been to say, here's citation, let's help readers get through the literature better, but it has been to actually change the behavior of scientists at doing the research from day one. So I'll give you kind of an example of that. In today's world, we say you should do all these different things that are good for research. You should share your data, you should make your code open, you should publish openly, you should publish negative results, so on and so forth. However, the fact of the matter is most people are not often rewarded for these things. They're rewarded for publishing in highly selective journals. And to get into highly selective journals, you often have to craft kind of a narrative that is surprising, that is groundbreaking. And that is just not a reflection of what the reality of research is. Not all research is going to be paradigm shifts or big surprises. In fact, most of it's not going to work. And so how do we incentivize and reward people to publish things more carefully as opposed to some things that are just more flashy? And so our hope is that by now showing that work has been supported or contradicted, that people do want to do these behaviors that will help people reproduce their work. So maybe they want to make their methods and results sections much more clear because they want other people to do this work. Similarly, with sharing data, again, they want other people to come and support their work, so they're trying to facilitate this. And then on the flip side of that, I think this provides a mechanism for maybe graduate students, which I think a lot of graduate students, and not just graduate students, but even PIs have felt. And okay, there's this rush to be first and to publish everything, but that is not just that publications get out there and it's this trophy that is never going to be looked at again. There is now, I would say, a negative feedback loop as well, in that it can be contradicted. And so our hope is that, this will slow people down, because we want publications to really kind of stand the test of time and to include all these different things. And so having these two feedback, loops in the mind of researchers, not only is for them to discover and evaluate research, but hopefully, changes how they produce research themselves. And so hopefully, that answers your question a bit. So I see another, no, I think that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a very thoughtful response. I appreciate that as well. I had another question for you, which was, I think, just to start, I think it's amazing how you've really integrated with the whole workflow. I think that the integrations with the manuscript submission process is a really smart one, that it'll be very helpful for editors to find reviewers and to sort of help analyze papers as they come in. And then I know you said, publishers should reach out to you if they want to see some stuff about their journals. Do you have any thoughts about moving toward, publisher dashboards or reports or things like that in a more formal set as an offering?
Yeah, so I think that's a great suggestion, and yes, we even have mock-ups for this. The issue is, again, it's just like a limitation of how small our team is and how focused we are on this one thing. And so in the interim of that, and what we've started to do with publishers is to provide them API access. And so if it's a large publisher and they have, an entire team looking at metrics, they can use this API as well as data, which we can just send to them, in CSV or like an FTP dump, to analyze this stuff in a lot of different ways. With that said, not all publishers and journals and people are going to want to access data through an API and do all these kind of complicated analyses. And so I think this dashboard is exactly what we have in mind. So you can start to see, over time and across geographies, across journals, how does my, how do my journals, how are the articles, how are all these different editorial processes happening? And I think with that, you can start to run experiments, say, around marketing. And I think, you know, these can be, some of these will probably be longer experiments. Does displaying this information, you know, on our article lead to more submissions, less submissions? And then there's a lot of, you know, there's so many different analyses that can be done. And so to give you an example of one of these that we're working with on a researcher is data availability statements. So certain publishers are requiring this. What is the effect of that on citations? Well, what is the effect of that on supporting and contradicting citations? And so there has been work that if you have a data availability citation statement in your manuscript, this will lead to more citations. And that is, you know, all well and good. But now with Cite, you can take that one step further and say, okay, if you have a data availability statement, does that lead to more supporting citations? And I think these types of analyses are not only interesting for the scientific community, but they're interesting for publishers who look at this more, you know, as a business and a way to improve upon how are they undergoing editorial, how are they publishing, things like this.
Wonderful. Well, we're at about 37 minutes. If I don't see any other questions pop in, if anyone else has any, last chance. And also feel free to email Josh directly after this, or if you have questions about how an integration might look as far as the widgets on the article pages, you can reach out to your PDM or to Josh and we can kind of start that conversation. I don't see any other emails coming in, but like I said, everyone will receive a recording of this webinar as well as a survey. And in there, it will have information about how you can get in touch with us. Josh had his info up there as well, so feel free to reach out to us. I did also want to mention that this is part of our monthly webinar series. So we've got some other webinars coming up in the months ahead as we're all sequestered in our homes. We can use these as a way to connect in the coming months, so feel free to check those out as well. Josh, thanks so much. This was extremely interesting, and yeah, hopefully we'll all be in touch again soon.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, thanks for organizing this as well, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Bye.
Bye.